So, it's been a while since I made an original rant, but I want to talk a little bit about Battletech. Battletech is one of the most interesting and fascinating settings I have ever read, heard of, or played in. At least in my opinion. I mean, this is going to be entirely my opinion, so I'm just going to have fun with it. Battletech, for those who are unfamiliar, also goes by Mechwarrior, because the Mechwarrior series of video games are set in the Battletech universe. Now, Battletech started as a tabletop war game back in the 80s. Fun fact, it was originally going to be called Battle Droids, but from what I understand, LucasArts or Lucasfilm didn't like that because they thought it might cause some confusion in the marketplace, so they changed it to Battletech very, very early on. But in essence, this setting is just the quintessential American mech setting. The idea is that in the distant future, continuous war has kind of left humanity at slightly above 21st or 20th century level of technology for many things. There are advanced technologies, there is faster than light travel, although it is, weeks or even months between star systems, depending on how far you're going. There is, faster than light communication, where they basically open micro wormholes and send packets of information through over the course of a couple of seconds, which is neat. And of course, the biggest draw of the setting is battle mechs. Gigantic machines that range from 20 tons all the way up to 100 tons that are piloted usually by a single individual, a skilled pilot who's designed to take this war machine into battle. Now, in real life, battle mechs as a concept have been popular for quite some time, but the idea in real life is pretty impractical. We have very, very few machines that walk. For very good reason. It's hard to do that. It's a lot of moving parts, it's hard to maintain and whatnot, and so it is rather difficult to make a walking machine, and it's very impractical to have an upright walking machine with vulnerable parts that are not only hard to maintain, but also that has a role in the battlefield. That's just asking for trouble. Get shot in the knee, get shot in the leg, get shot in the ankle, and you are going down hard. Plus, it's really hard to make something that walks low to the ground like a tank. In theory, the advantage of something that walks is it can go on pretty much all terrain, it doesn't need roads, it doesn't need anything flat, and it's more versatile than tracked vehicles. But then again, the disadvantages so far outweigh that to where it's rarely ever even considered in real life. I like the way that Battletech solves this, because Battletech, despite being so outlandish in its concept, battle mechs being the primary way that combat is fought, they actually have a pretty interesting way of handling it, because they are a fairly hard sci-fi setting, which is surprising, but they try to keep their technology pretty grounded. Again, even their faster than light travel, which most people just kind of hand wave as like, oh, hyperspace or, warp travel, where it's just as fast as the plot demands. Battletech instead has it take an extensive period of time. I don't recall the exact physics behind how Battletech jump ships work, but it is not a fast or easy process, and they treat it with the reverence you would expect, a hard sci-fi setting too, so it's fascinating to me. But the reason why mechs are chosen as the primary means of war are twofold. First and foremost, massive wars on the scale of planetary bombardments and whatnot are so costly in this future to where, they happened in the setting before, but it has left humanity and the nations that remain in this state of technological stagnation because of how often they did it. So, pretty much every, nation in this setting has decided, okay, all-out war, not practical, not reasonable, it's going to destroy all of us. So, instead, most of their battles are fought in single, limited engagements. Rather than trying to conquer a whole planet, you will try and conquer key military or primary assets of a planet in order to declare your ownership over it. And when it comes to deploying on just a couple of kilometers, of area, especially if you have control of the spaceport, or, you know, just the area over that particular part of the planet in space. I don't actually know how prevalent spaceports are in Battletech. I'll have to look that up. But in short, these limited engagements are a better idea. And battle mechs are the best way to get maximum amount of hardware to and from an area quickly. So you'll drop in on the edge of kind of the designated battle zone, and then you will run in and fight through armored divisions, through whatever, because traditional tanks and aircraft and whatnot do exist in this setting. But you will send in battle mechs to put as much hardware as you can into an area as efficiently as you can. So how is this possible? Well, I mentioned that it tries to be a hard sci-fi setting, so of course they have a solution as to why something as impractical in real life as a mech would be the primary means of combat. And that is a technology called Myomer. And it's not even an unrealistic technology. The concept is that it is essentially gigantic artificial muscle. Think massive metallic bundles of material that's reasonable to imagine, but semi-futuristic in that we just don't have the material science to make it yet in real life. But this Myomer, which was developed a couple hundred years from now in real life, so, you know, sometime in the 2000, or what is it, the 2500s, 2600s, at least in its current form in Battletech. Heck, it might have been developed in the 2400s, but I'll have to look. So this artificial muscle, this Myomer, it is extremely efficient and extremely strong. This thing, when put to an electrical charge, can carry, it can pull, can push a massive amount of weight all at once, and with very, very little material and energy investment at that. So, in other words, you have essentially gigantic artificial muscle fibers that can completely outdo anything that would be driven by an internal combustion engine, anything that would be driven by a traditional electric motor. But it's really hard to make a wheel using something that just pushes and pulls like muscle fiber. So they built things with legs, things that walk. Now you can move dozens of tons very, very efficiently. Also in the setting, they figured out fusion power sometime in the 2020s in real life, which really helped with their version of the space program. I'm still waiting on GM to invent that in real life, because, by the way, GM did that in the Battletech universe. Yeah, that GM, like General Motors. Like, there's some real names of real companies in here that survive into the distant future of the 3000s. It is great. But, yeah, in short, between having reasonably portable fusion engines, and by reasonably portable I mean they are a couple of tons, and having this extremely efficient muscle fiber Myomer, suddenly it's impractical to try and deploy massive amounts of military hardware like missile launchers and heavy laser cannons and, you know, even just traditional cannons on something like a tank, because the internal combustion engine, or even a fusion-driven or a fusion engine-driven electrical tank, still would not be able to move as fast or move as much hardware as efficiently as something that walks does. So they built these machines, they got really good gyroscopes, and the gyroscopic systems inside of mechs are kind of tuned to the pilot as well, so you put on a helmet and it kind of reads your neural patterns, and it kind of uses your own inner ear to help sync up with the gyros so that, you know, your mech is balanced. It's really cool. So you end up with these battle mechs that can march across the battlefield in these limited engagements and carry cannons on it that today's modern tanks could only dream of. And it is a wonderful setting. But it's not just the setting that's good. The game, both on the tabletop and the video games, are a lot of fun, especially if you are the kind of person who is very, very intricately interested in how military hardware works, or, you know, just kind of the variety of military hardware, or just vehicles in general. If you're a car guy, if you're a plane guy, especially if you're a warplane or a tank guy, or even a gun guy, I say guy, but I mean universal. Like someone who likes this stuff. Male, female, anyway. Regardless, whoever you are, this is in your ballpark if you're into that kind of stuff. Because not only is there a great variety of mechs, but it goes into detail. Alright? Technically, there's 4 primary categories. Light mechs, medium mechs, heavy mechs, and assault mechs. The light mechs go from 20 tons up to 35 tons, medium mechs go from 40 tons up to 55 tons, etc. And so this continues, and they all kind of serve their own different purposes. For instance, assault mechs are basically just walking turrets, whereas light mechs are capable of moving faster than most modern ground vehicles over any terrain possible and make fantastic scouts while still having, usually enough material on them to pose a serious threat to any sort of traditional tanks, vehicles, or gun emplacements. But that's just it. Between the 20-ton and the 100-ton range, there is an insane amount of detail for what goes on these. There is pretty much a mech for every purpose. And I'm not talking about some games that have a handful of mechs. I'm not talking dozens. I'm talking hundreds at this point. We're talking Pokemon levels of you can rattle off names of mechs all day, and even then, that doesn't account for custom jobs or Franken-mechs and things like that. There are various factions that, of course, will lean towards one mech or another, but another thing that makes this interesting is because the setting has such a storied history. Humanity spread out into the stars, and then they couldn't sustain going out that far, and then various kingdoms started to form, kingdoms, nations, what have you, and then eventually they tried to unite, and the biggest grouping of humans in this area of space that's reasonably distant from Earth called the Inner Sphere tried to unite, and they did for a little while in something called the Star League, but when they tried to conquer the rest of humanity that was not quite close enough to Earth, it ended up going badly, and then of course, as any large group gets, some of the large member states of this basically collapsed in on itself. Think about the Holy Roman Empire in space. That's kind of what you've got going on with the collection of humanity that started, and then it fell into infighting, and then it turned into a bunch of nations. Great houses. It's very feudal mixed with modern politics, and it's interesting. And by modern, I mean like the 50s onward. Post-World War II sort of election systems and whatnot, combined with a very feudal system where noble houses and nobles are still pretty common. It is fascinating. But because there's such a large history, you will have not just certain mechs locked into certain nations. Sure, there's certain nations that domestically produce a certain variety, so it's rarer to see one type of mech elsewhere, but it can happen, and the setting likes to focus a lot on mercenaries as well, who hop from nation to nation and get their hands on different mech designs. So rather than something like a Warhammer 40k situation where, oh hey, I bought this box of Space Marines, here's my Space Marine vehicles, and here's my Eldar and my Eldar vehicles, you can really mix and match pretty well. Sure, if you really want to read into the lore, like I like to do, you can populate your field with mechs that are only domestically produced by that nation that you have, or commonly used in the lore by the nation that you like to run. But you don't have to do that, and sometimes it can even lead to great lore, like, oh hey, I see that you're currently running, a Victor, and House Davian makes that over in the Federated Suns. Why are you driving it if you're over in, Steiner space, if you're over in basically space Germany? It's so far away. How did you get your hands on one? And then that leaves the door open to fantastic, not, role-playing opportunities or story writing opportunities. Like, oh, well, this was captured in a battle from X, Y, or Z, and then it ended up here. It's a lot of fun. It's very story-rich. I've heard some people describe Battletech as Game of Thrones in space, and while I wouldn't necessarily boil it down to that, I would say that that's not terribly inaccurate. But mash that with all of the, cool History Channel shows that you would watch way back in the 2000s on various specific planes and vehicles, and you've kind of got the ballpark of what Battletech is all about. there will be lists of exactly what each ton is used for in a mech. Exactly how that, what part of the mech it is on. In both the tabletop game and in the video game, damage is dealt to components and specific parts of the mech, and it is your job to maintain or kind of carefully watch what's damaged, and then after each mission, you've got to perform repairs. You've got to, manage all of that, and so it's a lot of fun. And because this game is so predicated on building and customizing your own mechs, there is a lot of flexibility. And the tabletop game is pretty balanced, too. They use a system called battle value, which essentially is just a number that quantifies all the different components of your mech and kind of where they go. And it comes out to roughly how balanced it is compared to a similar number. And it is the one and only thing that has significantly changed about the game since its inception in the 80s. They updated the battle value to be more flexible, to be, or rather more accurate, so that you have more, room to upgrade things and still be balanced. And that's another thing. Unlike, Warhammer 40k, because I do play 40k, it doesn't have 11 editions that you have to pick through. It doesn't have this massive series of, well, which edition was the most balanced, which edition was the best. There is only one real edition of Battletech, and it's Battletech. Sure. Like any game that's been around for 4 decades, it has updates, it has rules that are better suited in the future to other games, and the occasional rule that is meant to overwrite old rules. But no massive overhaul, no massive change. Again, even when they changed that battle value thing that I mentioned, that way to balance things, it wasn't... It didn't change any of the other mechanics of the game. All it did was change the number used to balance things. It would be like a Warhammer points update in one of the editions, where the edition doesn't change, it's just the points value. That was the most significant thing they changed about the system over 40 years. And that's because the system is very robust and very straightforward. It's hard to pin down a meta in this game. Yes, there are broken builds, as with any game. But because of the variety of the mech chassis that exist, unless you are literally bringing custom-built mechs to every fight explicitly designed for whatever the mission goal is, it's hard to play to some kind of meta. There are mechs that are better than others, but that's by design. In-universe, there are certain mech designs that are just not great. Just like in real life, there are tank designs that are just not great. There is a great mech that, if you've heard about Battletech, you've probably heard about the Urban Mech. It looks like a trash can, it looks like R2-D2 with legs and cannon arms. And it is, by technical definition, the worst mech in the game. It is a light mech, meaning it does not have that much armor, and light mechs are supposed to run in order to get the bonuses to not get hit. After all, armor doesn't really matter when you're moving at the speed of, like, insanity. But the Urban Mech is the slowest mech in the game, in both the video games and the tabletop, for the most part. And it tries to make up for this by having the kind of heavy hitting power you would expect from a decent-sized medium mech. Now, if you've never played the game, these words probably don't mean too much, but in short, it is a mech that is just not good in any of the categories that it should fit in. And yet people love it. And even it finds its little niche. It's decent at holding down emplacements, it's cheap to buy, it's efficient at walking through and clearing urban spaces. There's better mechs for all of those things, but the Urban Mech has its place in lore and in the games, and it is fun for what it brings to the table. Plus, there's always that challenge of, I have a machine that is objectively bad and I'm doing good with it. On the opposite end, you have certain mechs that are pretty good across the board, like the Atlas. If you look up Battletech, one of the first mechs you're going to see is the Atlas, because its cockpit looks like a giant skull. It's awesome. But that thing has a little bit of all of the hardware that you would expect. It's got cannons, it's got lasers, it's got missiles, and this thing has some of the best armor out there at a speed that's slow, but not the slowest. And it is terrifying and it is awesome, and you could literally walk up to a light mech and punch it with this thing and it would explode. It's a good mech. And the urban mech is a bad mech. And that's fine. Just like there are good and bad designs in real life for planes, for tanks, for everything. And that's what makes Battletech so interesting. There's such a variety of these mechs. Like I said, it's like Pokemon. There's dang near hundreds of these things, and they all have their role. They all have a storied history. They all come from X corporation or whatnot, or this company or this planet, or, you know, here's what battles they were used in. And if you're ever bored, look up the Battletech wiki. It's sarna.net, sarna.net, and it has massive articles for each mech. And, you know, again, there's so many of these things. And all of these articles are filled with the development cycle, where they came from, who made it, who ordered them the most, who tends to use it, the variants of this mech with different hardware, hardpoints, how they were tuned, how they were made. So all of this combined with the amazing history makes it just a paradise for anyone who likes writing or reading stories, for anyone who likes a challenge in their video game, and for anyone, or a tabletop game, and anyone who is interested in just a vast variety of vehicles. To me, the idea of looking at someone, two different designers for any sort of vehicle or tool, giving them the same prompt, and then having them both come back with wildly different designs, that's awesome to me. I don't care if it's a gun, a plane, or in this case a mech. It's cool when that happens because it shows that kind of design philosophy that both of them are coming from. And Battletech is just full of that. Multiple nations have a mech that excels at long-range combat. Multiple nations have a domestically produced mech that excels at scouting and speed and delivering heavy punching power in a short amount of time. Some mechs are designed with all energy weapons. They're laser boats so that they don't have to rely on ammunition or missile reloads. Some of them are just missile boats. Some of them are just completely insane in their design. There's a mech called a Hunchback that has one of the biggest guns you can slap on it on a frame that can barely hold it. It's called the Hunchback because it has a massive shoulder piece that the whole mech is built around just to carry this gun. And that's cool to me. Seeing just the variety of, okay, we have these elements in this universe, these are the kinds of weapon systems we have, what ways could we combine them with the limitations of tonnage and heat and weight? Oh, you have to manage your heat in this game a lot. Everything generates heat. And just seeing how they put all of these elements together to create this game is beautiful to me. This rant, as all of my rants, has been pretty unguided, so I'm pretty sure I jumped from one point to the next to the next to the next. But if you like vehicles, if you like a variety of things, if you like, seeing the differences between, some type of, if you want to know the difference between MiG-29A and the F-15, if you're that kind of individual who likes to, just compare and contrast vehicles in real life or fictional vehicles or something, you should check out Battletech. I really think you'll like it. And I started with a game called Mechwarrior 4 Mercenaries way back on the computer. Currently there is a sequel game to that, Mechwarrior 5 Mercenaries, and it is good. It is very good for that kind of feeling. I highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in those vehicles. I didn't realize I've been ranting for almost 25 minutes now, but maybe one day I'll do some lore or something for Battletech on the channel, because I really like it. But for now, thank you very much for listening to my rants, and genuinely, thank you for listening to my voice.